afternoon. I'm J. Lenora Bressler, and this is the January 30th, 2019 edition of the Bible Delight in the Details. We were having a little bit of a transmission problem just a few minutes ago, so we're going to start over. One of the most famous characters in the biblical narrative, and the most important, is John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus, who would proclaim that Jesus was indeed the Son of God, would go before him with a ministry that prepared the people for Jesus to come. Now, it's very important and interesting that we talk about exactly what was John the Baptist. And I said what and not who. In Isaiah, in one of the messianic prophetic passages, there's a discussion about what was going to happen immediately before the coming of the Messiah. And in chapter 40 of Isaiah, verse 3, we hear this passage. And there's a voice of one shouting in the wilderness, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God." Back in 168 BC, Israel was a vassal state. It was being kicked like a football back and forth between Syria and Egypt. And you may know from the story of Hanukkah that there came to power in Syria an exceedingly bad man, Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was kind of like a precursor to the end times Antichrist, in that he literally tried to wipe the Jewish religion off the face of the earth. And he did all kind of terrible things, desecrated the temple, and all sorts of things. Well, during that time, he put great pressure on the priesthood of Israel to renounce God, to do all kind of things which were anti-God, like slaughtering pigs on the altars, declaring him, Antiochus, God. And unfortunately, at that time, many of the priests went along. They were afraid for their lives, and they capitulated. As you know, this engendered a civil war. Judas Maccabeus and his sons led a guerrilla war for 3 years and ultimately took back the nation, kicked out Antiochus, and then we had the great miracle that we celebrate as Hanukkah. But there were a couple very interesting and important things that came out of that time in which many of the Jewish priests showed that they were not loyal. They were not good priests. One of those things that came out of it was the Pharisees. The Pharisees were a group of people that wanted to make sure that the people understood what God expected of them. They focused on right living. They had seen the people, including the priests, capitulate to this evil ruler, and they thought that education was the way to ensure that that never happened again. And so the Pharisees are the ones that actually established synagogues, which were worship. They were worship centers, but it wasn't like they were trying to take the place of the temple in Jerusalem, but rather it was more kind of like a Bible study center. And so in every community, there was a synagogue set up. As long as there were 10 Jewish men, you could have a synagogue, and they would come once a week at least and read from the Torah and talk about what it meant. We have a very bad taste in our mouth about Pharisees because by the time of Jesus, 165 years or so later, they had become corrupted and very legalistic, but they started out with the best of intentions. That there was another group that came out of this Civil War time and the time when the priests had capitulated to the evil Antiochus, and that was a group known as the Essenes. Now, the Essenes were also very upset with the priesthood, and they thought that they had abdicated, many of them had abdicated their rightful place as the spiritual leaders of Judea and Israel, and therefore the Essenes went out into the deserts, and they established communes where they would copy the scriptures and they would study in very, very harsh conditions. The Dead Sea Scrolls are believed to have been written by a group of Essenes. Now, why did they go out to the desert? Because when you read Isaiah and other of the Messianic passages, there was a connection between the desert and the coming Messiah. And the idea that what would prepare the people's hearts for the Messiah would be right teaching and right living that would be going on in the desert, just as I quoted from chapter 40, verse 3. Now, when you think about John the Baptist, what do you know about him? His ministry was always in the desert. In fact, we know that the Pharisees and Sadducees sent representatives from Jerusalem into the desert to check him out, to see what he was talking about. People came to him in the desert. That is emphasized over and over. He wore garb, which would have been associated with the desert, with the very rough-hewn clothes, and he was eating desert-type food, locusts and honey, things that he would have been able to find there. So the idea is, or the thinking is by many scholars, that he was part of these Essenes, very devout people who went to the desert in order to be removed from the temptation of sin in the bigger cities, and also and primarily because they truly believed that in the desert there would be the holy living and the emphasis on God, from which would ultimately come the messenger who would then shine the light on the coming of the Messiah. And indeed, Jesus confirmed that John the Baptist was indeed that messenger, and said that of all the prophets that had gone before, he was the greatest. John, probably an Essene. I'm J. Lenora Bressler. Visit me on the next edition of the Bible. Delight in the details. Have a great day.